What's happening, everybody? On today's show, for the first time since 2014, the SEC will not play for a national championship in college football. What went wrong? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Well, we got to dive right into it, as for the first time in 9 years, an SEC team will not appear in the national championship game. Alabama fell to Michigan in overtime Monday at the Rose Bowl, 27-20. Just Alabama's second loss of the season. Blake Corum answers in overtime for Michigan as they take the lead, and Jalen Milroe and the Alabama offense failed to convert on a 4th and goal from the 3, and they come up short. That means for the first time since 2018, there will be a national champion outside of the SEC, and for the first time since 2014, like we said, there will not be an SEC team fighting for a national championship. Of course, that year it was Ohio State versus Oregon. This year it'll be Washington versus Michigan. Nick Saban, Tommy Rees in Alabama, they are taking a lot of heat for how that thing played out on Monday evening on 4th and goal from the 3, with the Tide needing a touchdown to keep the game and their season going. They called a quarterback draw, and Jalen Milroe was stopped short, and Alabama's season ended just like that. After the game, Nick Saban said the fact it didn't work made it a really bad call. Tommy Rees just felt that was the best thing we could do, was have our quarterback run, but we didn't get it blocked, so it didn't work, and we didn't execute. Alabama's offensive line got chewed apart by that Michigan defensive front all night. Michigan ended the night with 6 sacks, and a lot of media members chiming in on social media saying, Alabama just got outplayed. Jeff Schwartz said just zero chance for success on that play. Everyone knew what was coming when the back motioned to an empty set, and they knew it was going to be Milroe, and he just didn't get much of anything. It felt like Alabama for a lot of this night kind of reverted back to the Alabama we saw much of this year, right? Like, inconsistencies on the offensive line, inconsistencies in the passing game where they didn't really have that, go-to receiver step up for much of the year. And like we mentioned, Michigan sacked Alabama, Jalen Milroe 5 times in the first half on Monday night, finished the night with 6 sacks. But according to the AP, that was a new record for the most sacks in the first half of a college football playoff, semifinal or final. There's been, 29 of those? Michigan's total sacks beat their previous record of 4 sacks in the first half by Clemson versus Alabama in the national championship back in 2015. It just feels like this was a little bit of fool's gold on Alabama and their offense. Down the stretch of the season, Jalen Milroe, he had a bad second half against Arkansas, a bad first half against Tennessee, and Bama played a pretty poor defenses in LSU, Kentucky, and Chattanooga. Those were all games where Milroe started to shine, and the offensive line started to look pretty legit. Then they had the game at Auburn, where they could only manage 20 points of offense until that epic 4th and goal from the 31, where, of course, Milroe completes a miracle pass, and they get out of Auburn with a victory, and they keep their playoff hopes alive. Then we saw just a really great effort defensively against Georgia in the SEC championship game, and they got out of that one with the 27-24 win over Kirby Smart and Georgia. But Jalen Milroe, even in that game, completed just 13 passes that day for 192 yards and rushed for just 29 net rushing yards. His numbers were okay. They weren't eye-popping or great. And then that brought us to Monday night as they played a really good Michigan defense. And we saw Milroe throw for just 116 yards. He ran the ball 21 times for 63 yards, accounted for no touchdowns. Jace McClellan had both of Bama's scores. And Milroe played well at times, but it was just, like we said, very inconsistent more often than not. Now the question is, was that on Tommy Rees? Was that on the play calling? Was that on Milroe and just him not getting it done? Again, a lot of blame to go around here, but Alabama got outgained offensively in this one by Michigan. 351 yards to just 288. Nick Saban, after the game, shared his locker room message to the players. He said, this is one of the most amazing seasons in Alabama football history in terms of where this team came from, what they were able to accomplish, and what they were able to do winning the SEC championship. He said, I'm really proud of this group. I just wish that I could have done more as a coach to help them be successful and help them finish. He said, I think this team probably improved from the Texas game early in the season as much as any team I've ever coached. And that's why I think for me as a coach, it's one of the teams I'll always remember most and are most proud of. Now, as Chris Vanini pointed out on social media, he said this Alabama team had the second highest 24/7 Sports team talent ranking in history, only slightly behind 2022 Alabama. He said it's wild how it doesn't have any playmaking wide receivers, and their offensive line struggled to pass block. They nearly lost to South Florida earlier in the year, but did manage to beat Georgia to win the SEC. So again, if you're an Alabama fan, I think you look on the season and see how it played out. I mean, sitting a quarterback down earlier in the year and having him rise to the occasion and lead you to an SEC championship win, that's got to be a proud moment. But losing this game, just so many missed opportunities out there for Alabama, even despite getting outplayed a lot. The defense really did step up in big moments and, just unable to get it done. And they're going to be looking back on that 3 yards short of at least extending overtime into, double overtime, and who knows what could have happened. But Alabama's season comes to an end. And thus, like we said, no SEC team playing for a national championship. One other Alabama note, Dallas Turner will forego his final year of eligibility at Alabama, declaring for the NFL draft. He told Alex Scarborough of ESPN, I'm gone, ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Look, we knew that coming in. He had one of his best years with 10 sacks, 14 and a half tackles for a loss, was an all-SEC first-team selection, did get a sack on J.J. McCarthy on Monday. So, Dallas Turner did everything he could. So, no shame in him saying, I'm gone. But this did open the door up for some trolls out there like Danny Cannell, who loves to relish in the SEC losing games. He tweeted out, Lank, ? Of course, that stands for the Alabama mantra that Jalen Milroe had, let all the naysayers know. He then added, Michigan was clearly the better team and deserved to win. Look, Danny was all in his feels in recent weeks of Florida State getting left out. So, Alabama fans kind of got after him because of that. So he's, of course, going to dance on the grave of Alabama as they get trounced in the college football playoff. So there you have it. Alabama is that's it for them, and that's it for the SEC. We did almost have a kind of SEC team in the playoff in Texas. We'll recap all the action of the weekend that was across the SEC here in just a second. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. I want to remind you guys this episode presented to you by friends over at FanDuel. Like the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use over at FanDuel. So many different ways to get on the action. Live game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. That's the best way to find all the popular parlays that people are getting in on. You just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Of course, they'll have the championship game up there. They'll have all the NFL playoff games as well. check them out. If you've been thinking about joining, now is a great time as we just turn the calendar into 2024. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, it is FanDuel. They are the official partner of the NFL. All right, continue on here. Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Going back, we're going to have plenty of action throughout this week and next week with more, players deciding to head off to the NFL. Sure, more transfer portal rumors and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get into it over these next couple of days and weeks. Make sure you're keeping it locked right here to Locked On SEC. All right, let's dive back into it. Some other SEC games from over the weekend. Let's check in on the Tennessee Volunteers as Josh Heupel and Nico Iamaleava took the podium after Tennessee blew out Iowa 35-0. As Nico left it all out there with several rushing touchdowns, and the former five-star prospect did not disappoint. Josh Heupel very proud of Nico and how he fared against a really, really good defense in Iowa. Heupel saying Nico played very well. For a first-time starter, nothing really rattled him. Heupel went on to say he truly believes Nico will be a dynamic player for Tennessee with the 4-touchdown performance against one of the best defensive units in the country, even if the Hawkeyes were missing a couple of key players. But the Vols finished the season 9-4. Reason to be optimistic. Look, it wasn't, after all the hype of what Hendon Hooker did with Joe Milton taking over, it was disappointing, but you end on a high note, you head off into the offseason, and you got some confidence in your young quarterback who projects to be the starter going into next season. Over at LSU, they played in the ReliaQuest Bowl as they beat Wisconsin 35-31. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver for LSU, had a nice day. 3 catches for 23 yards in the first half, but the 11-yard catch made him LSU's career yardage record holder. The catch put him over the 3,000-yard mark. Broke the record set by Josh Reed back in 2001. And Malik Neighbors finishes the season with the most total receiving yards and the highest yards per game average, and caught the 7th most passes and the 2nd most touchdowns this season. So good for him. Also, the quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, a lot of questions about him making his first career start. He led a clutch drive that ended with 3 minutes remaining as LSU went ahead by 4 points, connected with Brian Thomas Jr. for the score. And Brian Thomas Jr. finished with 8 catches, 98 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Garrett Nussmeier throwing for 395 yards and 3 touchdowns. So much like Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, LSU feeling very confident about Garrett Nussmeier as they head off into the offseason. But after the game, Brian Kelly asked questions about his defense, which once again was not very good, and it's not been good at all this season under Matt House. And Brian Kelly said he didn't make any changes on the defense because he said he wanted, quote, continuity on LSU's coaching staff through the early signing period and into the bowl game. Kelly said, quote, "We will now evaluate that the season is over. I will do a full evaluation of all of our staff, but I wanted continuity through the bowl game. And now my focus will be on 2024. Just interesting comments. I'll have to keep an eye on that. Will Matt House survive the offseason at LSU? Something worth tracking. Over at Ole Miss, they finished off their season with 11 wins for the first time in program history in a single season. The Rebels beat number 10 Penn State 38-25 on Saturday in the Peach Bowl and put a big exclamation point on a great season. They rolled up over 500 yards of offense against a Penn State defense that was a little shorthanded, but they finished 11-2. And Jackson Dart, by the way, over the weekend made it official that he is coming back. He shared a post on New Year's Day saying he's running back for another season in Oxford. And, of course, we know a lot of their wide receivers all coming back and all those great players they've added in the transfer portal from across the SEC. And the Rebels are going to be, you got to assume, preseason top 10 team next year. A lot of expectations. The schedule gets a little bit lighter for them. So big high hopes for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin and Jackson Dart heading into 2024. And a lot of people expecting they're going to be a playoff team. Another great SEC performance. This one was on Friday night. Missouri played their biggest game of the season, playing Ohio State. They got all the way to the 7-yard line, starting the fourth quarter in a game where they were trailing 3-0. Nothing went right on offense for 3 quarters. But what came in the fourth was 15 minutes of the best football Missouri has played. They put up 14 points, and they won the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State. After the game, Eli Drinkwitz said the fourth quarter was probably going to go down, and it's going to be a tough one to beat. That's one of the best in Missouri football history. Down 3-0 to score 14 and play as well as we did. So it's hard to contextualize all that stuff right now, but really proud. And so Mizzou gets the 14-3 win over Ohio State. Cody Schrader caps off his career and an incredible season with a 128-yard rushing performance. It was good enough to set the single-season Missouri rushing record that Tyler Beatty set 2 years ago. And 29 carries in that Cotton Bowl as they helped ice the game and the win over Ohio State. And Mizzou, just like Ole Miss, finishes the season 11-2 overall. Incredible job Eli Drinkwitz and company did. Over Georgia, the 2 top-ranked teams outside of the playoff faced off in the Capital One Orange Bowl, and 6th-ranked Georgia looked like a team that belonged in the playoff as they demolished Florida State 63-3. It was the largest margin of victory in bowl history. That topped their 58-point win over TCU in last year's national championship game. But, look, we know there were a lot of opt-outs and injuries for Florida State, but Kirby Smart said after the game, people need to see what happened tonight, and they need to fix this in terms of the opt-outs and portal entries and all that kind of stuff. Kirby said it needs to be fixed. It's very unfortunate they have a good football team and a good football program, and unfortunately they're in the position that they're in. But Georgia apologizing to nobody for the beatdown they put on the Seminoles. And after the game, some announcements from some players. Kendall Milton, running back, goes out with a bang, received the Orange Bowl MVP honor, led all players with 104 rushing yards, and he is heading off to the NFL. Dejon Edwards also made an announcement over the weekend, said he's grateful he's moving on to the NFL as well, so he will join Kendall Milton. Both of them declared for the NFL draft. Ladd McConkey had just 1 catch for 22 yards in the Orange Bowl, but showed off his speed with a 27-yard run, and he's had enough of college football. He announced he is off to the NFL on social media. Finished a very memorable career there. And then defensive back Tyke Smith, he is heading off to the pros after 3 seasons at Georgia. One more note on the Bulldogs, they will lose wide receiver C.J. Smith. Appeared in 9 games as a freshman this year. He will enter the transfer portal. So a lot of movement there. Over at Auburn, Maryland routed Auburn 31-13 Saturday at the Music City Bowl, winning a program record 3rd straight bowl game Maryland did. But Auburn, they finished 6-7, ending Hugh Freeze's first season back in the SEC, and they lose 3 straight to finish it off. Of course, that heartbreaking loss to Alabama in the final seconds will be one that sticks out. But Tigers lost a 4th straight bowl game and their first in 3 appearances in this bowl. Hugh Freeze said after the game, I don't need anyone to tell me that we don't measure up, and that starts with me. Maryland dominated from the opening snap, took a 21-0 lead, outgained Auburn 226 yards to 13 yards within the first 12 minutes. After the game, Zion Puckett announced he's played his final snap for Auburn. He's heading off to the NFL draft. Auburn also going to lose running back and primary return man Brian Batty. He entered the transfer portal on Monday, so he is on the move. And the Tigers, they started Peyton Thorne in this one, but with the game out of hand in the 4th quarter, Hugh Freeze went to Holden Gariner and then Hank Brown. After the game, Hugh Freeze said, as for the future of the quarterback position, it is wide open. He said, I'm constantly evaluating player, staff, everything. That position should be an interesting one in spring practice. It was an interesting response because just about 2 weeks ago, Hugh Freeze defended Peyton Thorne. Said, he's his guy. I'm standing by him. And now Hugh Freeze says the quarterback competition is wide open. And one more SEC bowl game on Friday. Kentucky sophomore Barian Brown scored 3 touchdowns, but Clemson rallied in the 4th quarter to beat Kentucky 38-35 in the Tax Slayer Bowl over in Jacksonville. Devin Leary playing his final game for the Wildcats. It was a mixed bag. Threw for over 300 yards, but turned the ball over. And running back Ray Davis, he's off to the pros. He had 13 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. Linebacker Trevin Wallace played in his final game at Kentucky, led the Cats with 11 tackles. But Clemson, they would answer in the final minute of the game, scoring from 3 yards out, added a 2-point conversion, took a 38-35 lead with 17 seconds left, but Devin Leary would be picked off by Clemson to seal the game. And that is a recap of what transpired over the weekend from the SEC. And again, it wasn't all that pretty for some SEC teams, but others nice victories. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We'll hit on a couple other SEC nuggets right after this, coming up in just a sec. All right, we continue on here on Locked On SEC, and just a few more nuggets before we call it a show. We head out over to Arkansas as KJ Jefferson made it official. He has found a new home. He announced on social media he is committed to UCF and Gus Malzahn. So KJ Jefferson heading to Central Florida. He was linked to them about a week ago as he visited them, and now we know he is moving on. He owns a ton of school records at Arkansas during his 5 years there at Fayetteville, accumulating almost 8,000 passing yards, 67 passing touchdowns. He's been great, and now he's heading to the Big 12. We'll see what KJ Jefferson is able to do over there at Central Florida, playing for a former SEC coach in Gus Malzahn. Another Arkansas note, Lorando Snacks Johnson is ready to run it back one more season at Fayetteville. He made 29 tackles this season, 5 pass breakups, and an interception. And he announced he is heading back to Arkansas. Started his career over at Baylor, but good news for Arkansas as they've had a ton of losses, including most recently Jaheim Thomas, the 4th Arkansas linebacker to enter the portal this offseason. They lost Chris Paul, Jordan Crook, Manny Powell. So Arkansas defense going to look very, very different next year with a lot of new pieces over on the football field. Over at Mississippi State, they beat out a couple schools for a coveted JUCO cornerback transfer out of East Mississippi Community College. Brylan Lanier, limited experience in the Division I ranks, former 3-star prospect, a Tuscaloosa native, originally landed at Alabama before transferring to Indiana. So we'll see what he is able to get done over there at Mississippi State. When Brian Kelly woke up in the new year, he got some good news on Sunday night into Monday morning. Dominic McKinley flipped his commitment from Texas A&M to LSU, a big-time elite defensive lineman from Lafayette, rated the number 1 recruit in the state of Louisiana. 6'5", 280 pounds, rated a 5-star in the 24/7 composite, the number 6 defensive lineman and number 27 overall prospect in the class of 2024. So just when LSU thought maybe their work was done in the recruiting class, it wasn't. That's a big-time pickup for Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers, as that happened before they played their bowl game. So good news there for Brian Kelly and company. And that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show. We'll talk a little bit more on the aftermath of the SEC getting left out of the national championship. We're not used to this. Every year at SEC Media Days, I ask Greg Sankey, are you getting tired of winning? There will be no winning a college football championship this year for the Southeastern Conference. Even Texas goes down to Washington in the final seconds. Had a chance here at the Sugar Bowl, but Quinn Ewers and company unable to get it done. So, I think maybe SEC could have like half claimed the championship if Texas would have gotten there and won it, but Washington versus Michigan, not in the cards. All right. Again, thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Check out our second listen. Go check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming on YouTube 24/7. That channel is streaming, so you can check them out, get all the biggest stories in the sports world. Go listen to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. I'm Chris Gordon. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.